The stars stretched endlessly across the void of space, cold and ancient beyond measure. And among them moved two ships that would soon change the balance of power in the galaxy. Forever Fleet Commander Thalvex stood on the bridge of the Silent Fang, his four eyes scanning the holographic display before him with the confidence of a predator who had never known defeat. And his scaled hands rested comfortably behind his back as he watched the tiny blip that represented his prey. The Valkyrie Dominion had ruled this sector of space for 3,000 years, conquering 17 species and absorbing their technology and knowledge into the ever-growing empire. And in all that time, they had never encountered a species quite like the humans. These newcomers from a small blue planet called Earth had only discovered faster-than-light travel a mere century ago, which made them practically infants by galactic standards. And yet there was something about them that made the High Council nervous enough to send Thalvex on this mission. "Commander, the human vessel has altered course again," reported his second officer Kira said, her voice carrying a note of confusion that she could not quite hide. Vex turned his attention to the screen, where the human cargo ship called the Persistence was making yet another seemingly random turn through space, and he let out a sound of disgust from deep in his throat. "These creatures have no understanding of efficiency," he declared to his bridge crew. "They waste fuel and time with every movement they make, and it is a wonder they ever manage to leave their own solar system." The Silent Fang was the pride of the Valkyrie intelligence fleet, equipped with cloaking technology so advanced that no species in known space had ever detected it. And Thalvex had personally overseen 17 successful surveillance missions without a single failure. His orders from High Command were clear and simple. Follow the human freighter, record everything about its capabilities and behavior, and report back with intelligence that would help the Dominion prepare for the inevitable conquest of human space. The humans had something the Valkyrie wanted, and it was not just territory or resources. For rumors had spread through intelligence channels that the Persistence carried prototype military technology that could shift the balance of power in the region. Thalvex did not believe these rumors entirely, because how could such primitive creatures develop anything that would threaten the mighty Valkyrie? But orders were orders, and he would follow them with the precision his species was known for 3 standard cycles. The Silent Fang followed at a safe distance of 50,000 kilometers, invisible and patient like a predator stalking wounded prey. And every emission from the human ship was recorded and analyzed by the most sophisticated computers in the Dominion. Crusette compiled her reports each day and presented them to Thalvex with growing frustration evident in her posture. And each report contained the same baffling observations. "The humans do not follow any logical pattern," she said during one briefing. "Their route through this sector is completely random, and they stop at mining colonies that offer nothing of strategic value. And I cannot determine what their actual mission might be." Thalvex dismissed her concerns with a wave of his clawed hand, because the answer seemed obvious to him, and he explained it as though speaking to a child. "They have no pattern because they are incapable of strategic thinking," he said. "These are simple creatures, driven by short-term needs and primitive instincts, and we should not expect them to behave like civilized species." But Kiraset was not entirely convinced. And late at night, when her duties were complete, she would study the human course data and notice something that troubled her deeply. With each passing day, the Persistence drifted slightly closer to a region of space called the Shroud, which was a vast nebula filled with ionized gases and electromagnetic interference that degraded even Valkyrie sensors. And the drift was so subtle that it could easily be coincidence. She mentioned this observation to Commander Thalvex, but he dismissed it as paranoid thinking, unworthy of a Valkyrie officer. And she did not bring it up again, even though the feeling of unease never left her. The human ship continued its wandering path through space, stopping at stations and colonies with no apparent purpose. And the crew of the Silent Fang grew bored with the routine of watching these primitive creatures go about their meaningless lives. Some of the younger officers began to make jokes about the humans, mocking their inefficient ships and their chaotic way of doing things. And they competed to see who could come up with the most insulting observations about their prey. Thalvex allowed this behavior because it kept morale high during what was turning out to be a tedious assignment. And he himself participated in the mockery during meals in the officers' dining hall. Did you see how long it took them to dock at that last station? One officer laughed. Our pilots could have completed that maneuver in half the time with their eyes closed. Perhaps their eyes were closed. Another replied. It would explain much about their navigation. The laughter echoed through the halls of the Silent Fang, and not one of them suspected that they were being watched in return. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Persistence and studied the tactical display with calm, dark eyes that had seen more combat than most admirals twice her age. And beside her stood her first officer, Lieutenant Commander James Chun, with a knowing smile on his face. They are still following, Chun reported. Right where we want them. Vasquez nodded slowly and allowed herself a small smile, because everything was going according to plan and the Volcari had no idea what was about to happen to them. How long until we reach the shroud? She asked. 2 more days at current speed. Good. Vasquez said. Signal the rest of the pack and tell them to move into position. And make sure they stay dark until I give the word. Chun sent the encrypted transmission, and the bridge crew of the Persistence continued their performance of being simple cargo haulers with nothing to hide. And they did it so well that even their own mothers would have believed the act. In the depths of space, 4 human warships received the signal and began moving through the darkness like wolves circling prey. And their engines were cold, and their systems were silent, and not a single photon escaped to betray their presence. The hunter had no idea that he had become the hunted, and the trap was almost ready to spring. The shroud stretched before them like a wall of purple and crimson fire frozen in time, and its swirling gases flickered with lightning that had been dancing through the nebula since before the first Volcari drew breath. Commander Thalvex felt a slight tremor of concern as the Silent Fang followed the human vessel into the outer edges of this cosmic storm. But he pushed the feeling aside because he was Valkyrie and fear was beneath him. Sensor efficiency has dropped to 87%. Kiraset reported from her station. The interference from the nebula is affecting our tracking systems. Thalvex acknowledged her report with a grunt, but did not order a retreat, because the human ship was still visible on their screens, and he would not abandon his mission simply because conditions were less than perfect. Valkyrie sensors are the finest in the galaxy, he reminded his crew. Even at reduced capacity, we are superior to anything these primitives possess. The bridge crew murmured agreement and returned to their duties. And the Silent Fang continued its pursuit deeper into the swirling chaos of the shroud. The Persistence moved ahead of them like a fish swimming through murky water, and its engines left a faint trail of radiation that the Valkyrie sensors could track even through the Interferenceithal allowed himself to relax slightly, because despite the degraded conditions, the mission was still proceeding smoothly, and soon he would have all the intelligence he needed to report back to High Command. Then, the human ship vanished. One moment it was there on the screen, a small blip moving steadily through the nebula, and the next moment there was nothing but static and cosmic background noise where the Persistence had been. Report, Thalvex demanded, his voice sharp with sudden tension. Kiraset's clawed fingers flew across her console as she tried to reacquire the signal, and her secondary eyes blinked rapidly in confusion as her instruments showed nothing but empty space ahead. I cannot locate them, Commander, she admitted. They have simply disappeared from our sensors. Impossible, Thalvex growled. They cannot have detected us, and they do not have the technology to mask their emissions so completely. So run a full diagnostic on our sensor array. The diagnostic came back clean, showing that all systems were functioning within acceptable parameters. And yet the human ship remained invisible. Thalvex stood absolutely still as his mind raced through possible explanations, and each one seemed more unlikely than the last. Perhaps the humans had been destroyed by some hazard within the nebula, but there had been no explosion and no debris field. Perhaps they had jumped to faster than light speed, but the energy signature of such a jump would have been impossible to miss even in these conditions. Perhaps they were hiding somehow, but that would require stealth technology far beyond anything the Volcari believed humans capable of building. Expand the search pattern, Thalvex ordered. They must be here somewhere, and they cannot hide forever. The Silent Fang began a systematic sweep of the surrounding space, its sensors straining to pierce the interference of the nebula. And the crew worked with growing desperation to find their missing prey. 10 minutes passed with no results. Then 20, then 30, and with each passing moment the tension on the bridge grew thicker, until it felt like a physical weight pressing down on everyone. Thalvex was about to order a withdrawal and admit defeat when Kiraset suddenly stiffened at her station. And when she spoke, her voice carried a tremor that he had never heard from her before. "Commander, I have a new contact." "Where?" Thalvex Demondedreset turned to face him, and he saw something in her eyes that looked very much like fear. Behind us, Thalvex spun toward the main view screen, and his 4 eyes went wide with shock, because there was the Persistence hanging in space, less than 5,000 kilometers off their stern. And its weapons were clearly powered and aimed directly at the Silent Fang. "How?" he whispered. Because this should not have been possible. The human ship had somehow crossed 12,000 kilometers of space without registering on a single Valkyrie instrument. And it had maneuvered into a perfect attack position without anyone on board the Silent Fang noticing anything at all before. Thalvex could give any orders. The communication system crackled to life, and a human voice filled the bridge with words that would haunt him for the rest of his days. "Silent Fang. This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Terran vessel Persistence, and I think it is time we had a conversation." The voice was female, and it carried a tone of amusement that made Thalvex's scales itch with anger, because no prey should ever speak to a predator with such casual confidence. "You have made a serious mistake, human," he responded, trying to project authority that he no longer felt. "The Valkyrie Dominion does not take kindly to threats against our vessels." Captain Vasquez laughed. And it was not a cruel laugh, but rather the laugh of someone enjoying a private joke. "Commander, you have been following my ship for almost 3 weeks now, and you did it very well, I must admit. But here is something you should know before you make any decisions you might regret." Thalvex waited, his claws gripping the armrests of his command chair hard enough to leave marks in the metal. "There are 4 more of my ships out there in the nebula right now," Vasquez continued. "You cannot see them because human stealth technology is apparently better than your intelligence reports suggested. And if you try anything aggressive, they will destroy you before your weapons can even finish charging." Kiraset frantically scanned the surrounding space, but her instruments showed nothing except the persistence and the swirling gases of the shroud. "She is bluffing," one of the junior officers whispered. "There is nothing out there." But Thalvex was not so certain anymore, because 5 minutes ago he would have sworn that the Persistence could not possibly sneak up behind his ship. And now here it was doing exactly that. "What do you want?" he asked. And he hated how his voice sounded almost defeated. "I want you to understand something, Commander," Vasquez replied. "Every random course change we made over the past 3 weeks was designed to lead you here. And every inefficient stop and every worthless colony was part of a plan to make you feel safe and superior." Thalvex felt cold spreading through his body as the implications of her words sank in. You were not running from us, he said slowly. No, Commander, we were hurting you. And now you are exactly where we want you to be. On the bridge of the Persistence, Captain Vasquez leaned back in her chair and watched a Valkyrie ship on her screen. And she could almost feel the confusion and fear radiating from it across the void. Lieutenant Commander Chen stood beside her with a datapad showing the positions of their 4 companion vessels. And each one was locked onto the Silent Fang with weapons ready to fire. They still cannot see the others, he reported with satisfaction. Good, Vasquez nodded. Let them wonder and let them worry, because a scared enemy makes mistakes, and I want them too scared to try anything stupid. She opened the communication channel again and prepared to deliver the message that would change the relationship between humans and Valkyrie forever. The hunter had become the prey, and class was about to be in session. The silence on the bridge of the Silent Fang stretched like a blade pressed against naked skin, and every member of the crew waited for their commander to respond to the human captain's words. Thalvex stood rigid at his station with his 4 eyes fixed on the view screen where the human ship hung in space, like a predator waiting to strike, and his mind raced through tactical options that all seemed to end in disaster. You expect me to believe that you have 4 invisible ships surrounding us, he finally said. This is clearly a deception designed to frighten us into surrender. Captain Vasquez's voice came through the speakers with that same infuriating calm that made Thalvex want to tear something apart with his claws. I understand your skepticism, Commander, and I would feel the same way if I were in your position. So let me give you a small demonstration. A moment later, the Silent Fang shuddered as something struck its hull, and warning lights began flashing across every console on the bridge. That was a paint round from the destroyer. Relentless, positioned 3,000 kilometers off your port side, Vasquez explained. It is completely harmless, but I hope it proves my point. Kiraset checked her sensors with trembling claws and confirmed what Thalvex already knew in his heart. Because there was no contact anywhere near the location Vasquez had described, and yet something had clearly hit them. How is this possible? Whispered one of the junior officers. We have the most advanced sensors in the galaxy. You have the most advanced sensors that your species has developed, Vasquez corrected. But Commander Thalvex, here is something the Valkyrie never understood about humans. I think it is time someone explained it to you. Thalvex said nothing, because there was nothing to say. And he simply listened as the human captain delivered a lesson that shattered everything he thought he knew. Your species rose to dominance on your homeworld, because you were apex predators from the very beginning. Vasquez said, you evolved claws and fangs and speed, and nothing on your planet could threaten you once you reached adulthood. She paused for a moment before continuing. Humans are different, Commander, because we spent 100,000 years as prey, and every night our ancestors huddled around fires while things with bigger teeth and sharper claws circled in the darkness waiting to eat them. Thalvex had studied human biology, and he knew they were soft creatures without natural weapons. But he had never considered what that might mean for their psychology. We learn to hide before we learn to hunt, Vasquez continued. We learn to deceive before we learn to fight. And we learn to set traps before we learn to build walls. Because those were the only ways we could survive against predators that should have wiped us out. The bridge crew of the Silent Fang exchanged uncomfortable glances, because this was not the picture of humanity that their intelligence briefings had painted. Your people believe that we are chaotic and inefficient and driven by emotion, Vasquez said. And we have worked very hard to make sure that the galaxy believes exactly that. Because underestimation is the greatest weapon a prey species can have. Thalvex finally found his voice. Though it came out rougher than he intended, you deliberately spread false information about your own capabilities. We spread certain impressions and allowed certain assumptions to go unchallenged. Vasquez admitted, there is a difference. But the result is the same. And here you are caught in a trap that you never saw coming. The commander's scales flushed with anger and humiliation, because he had prided himself on being the best intelligence officer in the Valkyrie fleet. And now he was being schooled by a creature his people considered barely sentient. "What do you want from us?" he demanded. "Information," Vasquez replied simply. "You are going to transmit all of your intelligence files on Valkyrie military deployments in the sector. And in exchange, we will let you live and send you home with a message for your high command." "That is treason," Dalvex growled. "I would rather die than betray my people. I respect that commander, I truly do. But consider this carefully before you make your final decision." Vasquez's voice hardened slightly, losing some of its casual friendliness. "We know about the planned incursion into Terran space. And we know the staging coordinates, and we know the fleet composition down to the last support vessel. And we have known for 6 months. Dalvex felt his secondary heart stop beating for a moment, because that information was classified at the highest levels. And if the humans truly had it, then the entire invasion plan was compromised. How? He asked. Though he dreaded the answer, because humans are very good at hiding and watching and waiting, Vasquez said. We had agents in place before your high command even finalized the plans. And we have been preparing our response ever since Kiraset made a small sound of distress, because she had helped develop some of those invasion plans. And the thought that human spies had been watching the entire time made her feel violated in a way she could not describe. The information I am asking for is intelligence you believe we do not have. Vasquez continued, but I suspect we already know most of it. And I simply want to confirm our data and fill in any gaps. Dalvex understood what she was really saying. Because if the humans already had this information, then providing it would not actually harm the Dominion, and refusing would only result in the destruction of his ship and crew for nothing. And the message for High Command, he asked Tholi. Tell them that the era of easy conquest is over, Vasquez said. Tell them that humanity has been watching and learning and preparing since the day we discovered that we were not alone in the universe. And tell them that if they want war, we will give them one unlike anything they have ever experienced. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was almost gentle. But also tell them that we would prefer peace, because humans are very good at making war, but we have learned that it is far more profitable to make friends. And we would rather have the Valkyrie as allies than as enemies. Dalvex stood in silence for a long moment as he weighed his options. And in the end, there was really only one choice that made sense. Begin the data transfer, he ordered his crew. And he ignored the looks of shock and betrayal on their faces, because he was the commander, and this was his decision to make on the bridge of the Persistence. Captain Vasquez watched the stream of intelligence data flowing into her ship's computers, and she felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with victory in battle. This was how humans had always survived against superior predators, not through strength or speed, but through cunning and patience and the willingness to play the long game. Phase 1 complete. Lieutenant Commander Chun reported. Should we proceed with Phase 2? Vasquez nodded slowly, because the real lesson was about to begin. And she hoped the Valkyrie were smart enough to learn it. Send in the boarding team, she ordered, and tell them to be gentle, because we want these people to go home and tell everyone what happened here today. The airlock of the Silent Fang, open to admit human Marines who moved with a fluid grace that spoke of years of training. And Commander Thalvex watched them come with the bitter knowledge that everything he believed about humanity had been wrong. The prey had become the predator, and the galaxy would never be the same. The human Marines moved through the corridors of the Silent Fang like water flowing through cracks in stone. And their movements were so smooth and coordinated that the Valkyrie crew could only stare in stunned silence as they passed Commander Thalvex had ordered his people to stand down, because resistance would only result in needless deaths. And he followed the Marine squad leader toward the bridge with the heavy steps of a defeated warrior. The squad leader was a young woman with short dark hair and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. And she moved with the controlled power of someone who had trained their body to be a weapon, Commander Thalvex. She said in accented but understandable Valkyrie, "My name is Sergeant Major Deanna Santos, and I want you to know that we have no desire to harm you or your crew." Thalvex made a sound deep in his throat that could have been acknowledgement or contempt. And Santos did not seem to care, which Captain Vasquez asked me to show you something, Santos continued. Something that might help you understand why this happened and why it will never happen the way you expected. She led him to the engineering section, where a team of human technicians was already working at the consoles. And what Thalvex saw there made his scales pale with shock. Tiny devices covered the walls and ceilings of the compartment, each one no larger than his smallest claw, and they pulsed with a faint blue light that seemed almost organic. "We call them whispers," Santos explained. "We planted them on your home 9 days ago when you passed within range of one of our monitoring stations. And they have been feeding us data ever since." "Impossible," Thalvex breathed. "Our hull sensors would have detected any foreign objects. Your hull sensors were the first thing we disabled," Santos said with a slight smile. "These whispers are designed to integrate with existing systems and mask their own presence. And by the time we were done, your ship was telling us everything while telling you nothing." One of the human technicians turned from her console and addressed Santos in their native language. And though Thalvex did not understand the words, he could read the satisfaction in her body language. "Lieutenant Park says that we have successfully downloaded your entire intelligence database," Santos translated. "Every report, every analysis, every communication with High Command for the past 3 years." Thalvex wanted to rage and roar and tear these soft creatures apart with his claws. But he knew that such action would only result in his death and the death of his crew. So he forced himself to remain still. "Your people told us that humans were impulsive and emotional," he said quietly. "They told us that you could not plan ahead and that you were slaves to your short lifespans." Santos laughed. And it was not a mocking laugh, but rather one of genuine amusement. "That is exactly what we wanted them to think, Commander. Because a species that believes its enemy is inferior will make mistakes. And we have been counting on those mistakes since the day we realized that the Valkyrie were watching us." She reached into a pouch on her belt and pulled out a small device that projected a holographic display in the air between them. And the display showed a timeline that stretched back decades. "This is when we first detected Valkyrie surveillance drones in our solar system," she said, pointing to a date nearly 40 years in the past. "And this is when we decided how we would respond." The timeline showed years of careful preparation, of technologies developed in secret, of agents placed in positions throughout the galaxy, of plans within plans that had been set in motion before Thalvex was even born. 40 years, he said in disbelief. "You have been preparing for this confrontation for 40 years. Longer, actually," Santos admitted. "This specific plan has been in development for 4 decades. But humans have been preparing for encounters with hostile aliens since we first looked up at the stars and wondered if we were alone." She put the device away and gestured for Thalvex to follow her back toward the bridge. And he did so because there was nothing else he could do. "Your intelligence services made a fundamental error in their assessment of humanity," Santos said as they walked. "They looked at our history and saw chaos and violence and self-destruction, and they concluded that we were a species that could not control ourselves." Thalvex had read those assessments himself and had believed every word of them, because they matched what he saw when he looked at human behavior. What they failed to understand is that our chaos is a form of strength. Santos continued. Every war we fought taught us something new. Every failure made us more determined. And every time we fell down, we got back up stronger than before. They reached the bridge where the rest of the Marine team was finishing their work. And Captain Vasquez's face appeared on the main view screen with an expression that was almost sympathetic. Commander Thalvax, she said, I hope Sergeant Major Santos has helped you understand what happened here today. She has explained much, Thalvax admitted. Though I am not certain I fully comprehend the implications. Then let me make it simple for you, Vasquez said. The Velkari have been the dominant power in this region for 3,000 years. And in that time, you have never encountered a species that thinks the way we do. She leaned forward slightly, and her dark eyes seemed to pierce through the screen and into his soul. We do not follow patterns because patterns can be predicted. And we do not optimize because optimization makes you predictable. And we do not play by the rules because the rules were written by species who wanted to keep us weak. Thalvax felt something he had not experienced since he was a hatchling, and it took him a moment to recognize it as genuine fear. What happens now? He asked. Now you go home, Vasquez replied. We will repair the damage our whispers caused to your systems. And we will send you back to Velkari space with your crew intact and your ship functional. You are letting us go, Thalvax said in disbelief. We are giving you a message to deliver, Vasquez corrected. And the message is this. Humanity is not your enemy unless you choose to make us one. And we would very much prefer to be your friends, she smiled. And for the first time it seemed like a genuine expression of warmth rather than a predator, baring its teeth. The choice is yours, Commander. And we will be waiting to see what the Velkari decide. The Marines began withdrawing from the Silent Fang, leaving behind a crew that was shaken but unharmed. And as the last human left the ship, Commander Thalvax stood alone on his bridge and tried to process everything that had happened. He had come to this nebula as a hunter tracking primitive prey, and he was leaving as a messenger carrying words of warning and hope to his people. The galaxy had changed today, and Thalvax suspected that nothing would ever be the same again. The Silent Fang limped back to Velkari space with engines that somehow worked better than they had before the humans touched them. And Commander Thalvax spent the entire journey preparing his report for the High Council. He knew that his words would either save his people from a catastrophic mistake or seal his own fate as a traitor and a coward. And he chose his phrases with more care than he had ever used in his long career. The capital world of the Velkari Dominion rose before them like a jewel of civilization, its orbital stations bristling with weapons that had kept the Empire safe for 3 millennia. And Thalvax felt a strange mixture of pride and sorrow as he looked upon it. We are being hailed by the Orbital Defense Command, Kiraset reported from her station. They are demanding to know why we have returned early and why our transponder codes show signs of tampering. Thalvax had expected this, because the humans had not tried to hide their intrusion into the ship's systems, and he suspected that was deliberate. Tell them that I am carrying a message of critical importance for the High Council, he ordered, and tell them that every moment of delay puts the Dominion at greater risk. The defense forces must have sensed the urgency in his transmission, because they cleared a path through the orbital traffic and assigned him a priority landing pad at the council complex itself. Within hours, Thalvax stood before the 17 members of the High Council in the great chamber where the fate of species was decided, and he told them everything that had happened in the shroud. The council listened in silence that grew heavier with each word. And when Thalvax finished speaking, the eldest among them rose from her seat with movements that betrayed her great age. You are telling us that humans detected our surveillance and led you into a trap, she said, and that they possess stealth technology superior to our own, and that they have been aware of our invasion plans for months. Yes, eldest, Thalvex confirmed. I know how this sounds, and I know that some may believe I have been deceived, or that I am a coward seeking to excuse my failure. But I swear on my honor that every word I have spoken is true. The council members conferred among themselves in low voices, and Thalvex stood at attention while they debated his fate and the fate of the Dominion itself. Finally, the eldest raised her hand for silence and turned her ancient eyes back to the commander who had brought such disturbing news. We have reviewed the data you brought back, she said, and our analysts have confirmed that it contains information the humans could not have known unless they had access to our highest security networks. Thalvex felt a cold wave of vindication wash through him. Because he had been right, and now the council knew it. The invasion of human space is hereby cancelled, the eldest declared. And all resources previously dedicated to that operation will be redirected toward improving our intelligence, capabilities, and defensive technologies. The younger council members stirred with obvious displeasure, because the Valkyrie had never retreated from a planned conquest, and many of them clearly viewed this decision as shameful weakness. We are also establishing a new department within our intelligence services, the eldest continued, dedicated entirely to the study of human psychology, human history, and human methods of warfare. She fixed Thalvex with a look that seemed to see through every layer of his being. You will lead this department, Commander, because you have learned lessons about humanity that no other Valkyrie possesses, and we cannot afford to waste that knowledge. Thalvex bowed his acceptance, though he felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders like a physical burden. Over the following months, he assembled a team of the brightest minds in the Dominion and set them to work, analyzing everything known about humanity. And what they discovered terrified him more than anything that had happened in the Shroud. The humans had spent their entire evolutionary history as both predator and prey, switching between roles depending on the circumstances, and this had given them a mental flexibility that no other species in known space possessed. They had invented deception and misdirection before they developed written language, and their military history was filled with examples of weaker forces defeating stronger ones through cunning and trickery. Most disturbing of all was their adaptability, because every species the Valkyrie had conquered followed patterns that could be learned and exploited. But humans had no single pattern and would steal useful ideas from anyone, including their enemies. 6 months after the Shroud incident, the High Council made a decision that would have been unthinkable a year earlier, and they sent an ambassador to the human homeworld with instructions to negotiate rather than threaten. Thalvex was assigned to the diplomatic mission as a military advisor, and he found himself standing in a grand hall on Earth facing creatures who had humiliated him but also shown him mercy. Captain Elena Vasquez was there representing the human military, and she smiled when she saw Thalvex with a warmth that seemed entirely genuine. Commander, she greeted him. I am glad to see that your people chose wisdom over pride. We had little choice, Thalvex admitted. Your demonstration in the Shroud made it clear that war with humanity would not end the way our strategists predicted. The signing ceremony for the Terran-Valkyrie non-aggression pact was brief but historic. And when it was complete, the ambassador approached Captain Vasquez with a question that had been burning in him since he first read Thalvex's report. You had the Silent Fang completely at your mercy, he said. You could have destroyed it and started a war that your people would almost certainly have won. So why did you show restraint? Vasquez considered the question for a moment before answering, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight of hard-earned wisdom. Because destroying your ship would have been the easy choice, she said. And humans have learned that the easy choice is rarely the right one. She extended her hand in the human gesture of peace and friendship, and the ambassador took it after only a brief hesitation. We are very good at being hunters, Ambassador, and we are very good at being survivors. But we have also learned that the greatest victories are the ones where nobody has to die. She smiled again. And this time Thalvex saw something in her eyes that he had never expected to see from a human. Hope, we would rather have you as friends than as prey, Vasquez said. And I think that together our species can accomplish things that neither of us could achieve alone. The ambassador felt something shift in his understanding of the universe, because he had come here expecting to negotiate with dangerous primitives. And instead he found himself speaking with a people who had mastered the hardest lesson that any species could learn: humans were not the new apex predators of the galaxy. And they did not want to be, because they understood something that the Velkari had never grasped in 3,000 years of conquest. True strength was not measured in ships or weapons or territory, but in the wisdom to know when fighting was necessary and when peace was possible. As the ceremony concluded and the two species began the long process of building a genuine alliance, Thalvex stood at the window and looked out at the blue skies of Earth. These soft creatures without claws or fangs had somehow survived everything their hostile universe had thrown at them. And now they were reaching out their hands in friendship to a species that had planned to conquer them. Perhaps that was the greatest strength of all. The ability to transform enemies into allies and to choose hope over fear. The hunter had become the prey, and the prey had become something far more dangerous and far more wonderful than anyone had ever imagined. They had become partners in the endless adventure of existence. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The end.